Welcome to the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Davidson, and in this podcast, we'll explore the art and science of negotiation in real-world situations. Whether you're negotiating a business deal, asking for a raise, or trying to resolve a conflict with a colleague or loved one, negotiation is an essential skill that can help you achieve your goals and build better relationships. Through interviews with experts, real-life stories, and practical tips and techniques, we'll deep dive into the strategies and tactics that can make you a better negotiator. From understanding your own negotiation style, to reading body language, handling difficult conversations, and overcoming common challenges, this podcast will give you the tools you need to negotiate with confidence and achieve your objectives. So whether you're a seasoned negotiator looking to refine your skills, or someone who's new to the game, join us as we explore the world of negotiation in real life. In this episode of Negotiation in Real Life, I speak with Kwame Christian, a two-time best-selling author, a business lawyer, and the founder and CEO of the American Negotiation Institute, a global consulting firm specializing in negotiation and conflict resolution. He is also the host of the #1 negotiation podcast in the world, Negotiate Anything, with over 5 million downloads and listeners from all over the world. After the success of his first bestseller, Finding Confidence in Conflict, How to Negotiate Anything, and You're Your Best Life, Kwame's second book, How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race, Practical Tools for Necessary Change in the Workplace and Beyond, is now available as a relatable guide for helping everyday people navigate one of the most polarizing and important conversations taking place in society. Kwame currently resides in Columbus, Ohio with his wife Whitney and his two sons, Kai and Dominic. In our discussion today, we speak about how it only takes one person to change the quality of a relationship, the avatar of the perfect negotiator, you'll be surprised by this one, the challenge of negotiating as the owner of a growing business, and much, much more. Please enjoy the episode. So welcome to Negotiation in Real Life, Kwame.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
It is an absolute pleasure. I'm delighted to have you as a guest. And I know we've chatted before on your podcast and had some very good conversation. Before we get into this episode, I'm going to steal a line right out of your book and say, can you tell the listeners who you are and what you do?
Yes, it feels so good to be on this side. This is nice. So my name is Kwame Christian. I'm the founder and CEO of the American Negotiation Institute, where we conduct negotiation and conflict resolution trainings that make difficult conversations easier. I'm also the author of 2 books, Finding Confidence in Conflict and How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race. That last book is the most recent one, and really you can insert the title like this, How to Have Difficult Conversations About Insert Sensitive Topic here. It's a skills-based book on how to have these types of tough conversations. And then also host of the #1 negotiation podcast in the world, Negotiate Anything. And the only reason we have such a great audience is because we have people like Nicole Davidson joining us every week on this show.
I love it. Thank you. And I will put a link to the episode that we recorded in the show notes for this. So people who want to check that out can do so as well. Kwame, I'm really intrigued. I know that you are qualified as a lawyer, but I'd love to know, how did you get into doing what you're doing now, running the American Negotiation Institute?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. And I think I came to this point in a way that's different than most negotiation experts. I came here because I was profoundly bad at difficult conversations. So I'm a recovering people pleaser, and I really found it tough to stand up for myself. And it wasn't until law school that I discovered negotiation for the first time. I don't even think I was really conscious of what that term even meant, but it fit into my schedule. So I decided to take the class. And I was blown away because it was the first time I realized that this was a skill, not a talent. I could actually get better with practice. So I became obsessed. And so we had these, we have moot court competitions, but they had negotiation competitions too. And so my partner and I, we participated in the competition at Ohio State in our law school. We won that competition. That gave us the opportunity to represent the school in the ABA competition, American Bar Association competition in Ottawa, Ontario, in Canada. And we won that competition as well. And then we made it to the semifinals of the ABA national competition in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I was hooked. because I was saying to myself, if I could spend my whole life being so bad at this, but then I can take the time and dedicate myself and learn these skills, this is a life changing realization. And so for
Yeah.
me, it was empowering because every time I did it and stood up for myself, it was like a vote in confidence for the man that I wanted to be. But
Yeah.
even more so, I said to myself, I want to find some kind of career where I can spread this message to other people. And that's what
I
led me to NIRL.
love that. That is fantastic. And firstly, I think it's amazing that you got the opportunity to do that at law school, because I know here in Australia, negotiation, it's there, but it's not a big thing, and it's not always done as a skills course. Sometimes it's done as a theoretical overview of negotiation rather than deep diving into the skills. So it's fabulous that you had that opportunity.
Thank you.
Um, how did you go about doing that? Because, and I get asked a lot these days by law students, how do I get into negotiation? How do I do that? And there don't seem to be that many opportunities at a junior level. How did you make it happen?
Had to kind of force it, Nicole. That's the thing. Like it wasn't readily available. And I think one of the major takeaways I've taken from my career is that sometimes you just have to make it happen. And if it's not there,
Mm,
you have to build it. Because I was practicing for a bit, did some policy work, and I was trying to figure out what that opportunity would be. And there aren't many negotiation consulting firms. We can walk
yes,
down the street, we can see law firms everywhere, but a negotiation consultancy, not that many, right? So I
yeah,
built it. So I started the American Negotiation Institute, launched with the podcast, and just my strategy was just generosity. I'm like, I'm going to give away
yeah.
as much free information as possible, and then the opportunities started to present themselves.
Fantastic. I love it. And it's interesting because I think I'm listening to this, hearing some parallels with my own journey coming into negotiation. It took me a little longer to discover negotiation because I think I'd just turned 40 when I started working in the negotiation space, but had previously been a lawyer,
Right.
and not stayed there because there was something missing for me. And I think I discovered what was missing was that negotiation piece. So really, really interesting. Um, Having started that, what were, coming into it, I think some of the negotiation experts out there that you and I would come across on a regular basis have come from the basis of, working in sales or working in procurement and doing these negotiations day on day, and then deciding to specialize in the negotiation skill. Um, how have you found coming in the way that you did, and what's made the most profound difference to building your skills as you got down that path?
Yeah, and this actually allows us to do a bit of a callback to the conversation we were having before the interview began. So I started off the podcast um, with the title Negotiation for Entrepreneurs, because for me, as a business lawyer working predominantly with small businesses, I said the people who need to negotiate the most are entrepreneurs. And then I surveyed the audience and found out that the majority of them were not entrepreneurs. So I generalized it. And I think one of the things that has been most eye-opening and really encouraging is the fact that we're all negotiators. It's just a question of
Mm,
whether or not we do it. And so I
yeah,
think about Nike. And so what Nike said is our goal is to be an athletic brand. We want to provide sports apparel for athletes. And then this is the kicker. They defined athlete, and they said if you have a body, then you are an athlete. And that broadened their market. And so for me, I think about negotiation. If we think about the classic definition of negotiation, we would talk about it being a structured process where
mm,
two or more individuals or organizations come together to work out a deal, whatever that
yeah,
happens to be, or solve a problem. But for me, the way I define negotiation is anytime you're in a conversation and somebody in the conversation wants something. And so
yeah,
when you broaden it that way, we realize that we're negotiating every day. But the problem is we don't realize it. And so
yeah.
we don't have that signal to turn on the skills. And that's what I want to bring to the world with this mentality.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I often when I'm in the training room starting a course, I'll say to people, put your hands up if you've negotiated in the last week. And the number of times there's no hands go up in the room, and I'm like, okay, so do you have a friend? Do you have a partner? Do you have family? Have you had a conversation in the last week? You've probably negotiated. But that shift in mindset is really significant, isn't it? As you start talking to people about this.
Absolutely. It's so empowering too, because a lot of times we have these conversations and we say, oh, this is a difficult person, or this is an annoying conversation, or whatever it might be. And it's really disempowering because we say, all right, I'm having this conversation, it didn't go well. But then if
Mm.
we look at it through the lens of negotiation, we could say, this is an opportunity for me to utilize the skills that I learned in Nicole's podcast. This is one of those times I can actually elevate this conversation. And one of my favorite quotes about relationships is that it only takes one person to improve the quality of a relationship.
Yeah.
And it only takes one person to improve the quality of a conversation. And if
Yeah.
you're the person listening to this podcast, the responsibility is on your shoulders, because it's very likely that you're the only person in the conversation who has taken the time to listen to a podcast like this to then have the opportunity to improve the skills. And so ultimately it's empowering to recognize the impact that we can have on ourselves and on others and on
Mm.
the world when we start to learn these skills.
Yeah, I love that too, because, the other thing that comes up a lot is, but what if I'm negotiating with someone who's just a really tough negotiator and they are playing hardball? Don't I just have to match their style and become a really hardball negotiator? But I think, as you've said, you can, if you've got the skills, you can manage that conversation in a way that actually brings them around to a point where you can get productive.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important things that people need to realize is that when you think about the avatar for the perfect negotiator, what do they look like? Look in the mirror. That's what it looks like. Because
Yeah.
you have to be comfortable in yourself and you have to be authentic and true to yourself as you negotiate. So I'm not trying to turn everybody into little mini versions of Kwame when they negotiate. I want to give people the general principles so they can understand the psychology behind the conversation, not just give people skills and
Yeah.
tools and tactics and strategies, but also break down why they work. Because I think when people have a deeper understanding of the psychology behind the strategies and tactics, it helps you to be a lot more flexible. Because a lot of times
Yeah.
people are just hunting for tactics. And so they're
Yeah.
like, oh, when I see this opportunity, I'm going to use this phrase or that, right? But oftentimes, negotiation exists in the margins. It's not going to be perfectly aligned for the
Mm.
specific textbook strategies that you put in place. So authenticity is really important. So if you go up against that tough negotiator, you don't need to become that tough negotiator in order to be effective. You just need to be flexible in your approach to know how to deal with that tough negotiator in a way that's authentic to you.
Yeah, I love that. And that reminds me very much of, I love the analogy that Michael Wheeler uses in his book. I'm not sure if you've come across that, The Art. I think it's called The Art of Negotiation. I always forget the title. But he uses the analogy of negotiation being like improv jazz. You've got to learn all of the skills. Like, you've got to have the ability to do all of these different things. But then the thing that makes improv great is that you never know what's the skill you're going to need next. So it's being able to react in the moment to what's just happened and go, okay, well, now I can flex. I know what I need to do next to match what's just happened, or to change direction. But it's you can't plan for, oh, well, I'll do this when they do that. You just never know what's coming. So I think that analogy really stuck with me when I read his book.
Absolutely. And it's a great analogy too, because I think that's one of the most beautiful and also the scariest thing about negotiation. There's
Yeah.
so much that is unexpected, and that fear of the unknown can hold people back. But there are many different ways that we can think about confidence, but another way we can think about it is trust in yourself, trusting
Yeah.
in your skills. So going into the conversation, I never know what the conversation is going to exactly be like. It's kind of like our podcasts. We never know
Yeah.
what it's going to be like. The conversation just flows. But then in our podcast, we have to trust ourselves as the interviewer to be able to have the conversation flow organically in a way that makes sense and is productive. And as a negotiator, we have to embrace those surprises and have trust in our skills that we'll know what to do when the time comes.
Yeah, great. Well, I want to circle back to something that you said, and I was interested that you said this because I was just listening to one of your other episodes the other day with Nancy. Oh, I've forgotten her
Medoff?
last name. Medoff, yes, you did the
Yeah.
live with Nancy recently, and you mentioned there that you were a recovering people pleaser. So I had stuck on my agenda that I was going to ask you about that, and then you raised it again. So I'd love to sort of dig down a little bit to, what are some of the examples where you have taken these negotiation skills that you've developed to act differently to how you might have before when you're in that sort of feeling that need to people please?
My mind automatically goes back to the most recent tough negotiation I had. I'll leave out names because they are recognizable, but I think there were times in the past where, and thankfully I got over my people pleasing in law school. You can't be that like super accommodating lawyer. That's not helpful. It's like, oh yeah, Kwame is a great lawyer, friendly guy, but he gives away everything. So I can't be that. But I remember in the past, if I got an offer or that was insulting, I would begrudgingly accept it with a smile.
Mm-hmm.
I'm that friendly person, so I can make people feel comfortable and safe in almost any situation. But a lot of times I was using that skill as almost a benefit for others, but a weapon against myself, where
Yeah.
I wouldn't advocate for those things that I needed. So I was very accepting. It was very rare for me to stand up and like set boundaries or barriers. But now I can feel that desire to accommodate, that desire to people please. And it's almost like a bit of a meta negotiation with myself. I have to honor that feeling. I have to recognize that that little people pleaser inside of me is always going to be there. But then what I do is I say, Kwame, pretend like you are coaching somebody else. What would you tell this person to do at this moment? And I think there are going to be times where we have to recognize we need to honor our emotions, we need to honor our feelings, and we have to remember that our thoughts and our feelings are not truths, they're signals,
Yeah.
but they do not carry perfect messages. So you have to ask yourself, what is this emotion telling me? And a lot of times that people pleasing is essentially a fear response. It's kind of like a
Mm.
trauma response. This is how you respond. So I have that desire to please, but I've learned to be a bit more skeptical of that desire and figure out what the real problem is, address that internally, talk it through with myself. And if I'm really struggling, I talk it through with what I call my personal board of directors. So these are family members,
Yeah.
friends, business associates, mentors that I trust. And I'll say, how is my thinking on this? Because Nicole, there are going to be times where we might not be thinking very clearly, even though we feel very
Yeah.
strongly about what we're thinking. And so I think I've created these internal mechanisms within myself and external mechanisms where I incorporate other people to
Yeah.
run these checks on how I'm feeling. And then I say, listen, Kwame, you're in that you've accepted the message from your emotions. You know what that is, and now it's time for you to trust your skills. Now it's time for you to step up and be a skilled negotiator. And my simple rule is the less that I want to have the conversation, the more that I need to have the conversation in order to make myself stronger for the next time.
Absolutely, isn't it? And I think that's one of the things that people often will go, they'll spend their time negotiating with themselves about whether to even have this conversation. And they'll generally, come up with a million reasons why actually I don't even need to go there. So they never get the experience, they never get the practice, the chance to improve, and they don't get the results that they need either. So really interesting what you've just said there. And in fact, it ties in one of the things that I've just started offering people is for those sort of situations where you've talked about going to your board of directors, your personal board of directors. Um, Sometimes they can be, you've got to be careful when you've got that sort of board of directors. I think that they don't just tell you what they think you want to hear. And if your board of
Yes.
directors isn't particularly skilled in negotiation, I'm sure you've got one that completely is. But you can actually get bad advice from those. If you're just using family and friends and colleagues, you can get bad advice. So one of the services I've just started offering is what I call the negotiation GP service, where instead of coming to an independent board of directors, you come to a negotiation specialist to really do that. Just a quick triage of what's going on here and some tips on how you might move things forward. So I think, as you've suggested, even if you are highly skilled in negotiation as you are, when it comes to your own negotiations, the emotion always makes it more tricky.
Absolutely. This is so valuable. So listeners, I want to make sure that you're paying attention to this part because this is really it's incredibly valuable to have somebody like Nicole on your side as you're going through these things, especially if you think you're good. So because that arrogance is exactly what gets you in trouble. And I don't know if they have this saying in Australia, but in the American legal system, we have a very profound saying. The person who represents himself has a fool for an attorney. Right?
Yeah.
You're too close to it. It's impossible to be objective. And so it's really important that you have somebody that is a trusted advisor to make sure that you're thinking through things correctly. And to your point, it's really important to recognize that there's a difference between like your group of cheerleaders and your personal board of directors. A lot of times they're not the same thing, so you might go to your cheerleaders if you're feeling down and they tell you how awesome you are. Then you go to your board of directors to humble you and say, listen, Kwame, you're not that awesome. You're not thinking straight right now. This is what you need to do. So you have to understand the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever feel stuck in a negotiation or conflict? You're not quite sure what the next step should be? Friends and colleagues may give advice, but perhaps they're only seeing things from your side. My new Negotiation GP service is for exactly that situation. You can book a short, standard or long consultation where we will explore your situation using a systematic approach. You will walk away with concrete steps to follow and an increased confidence to manage the situation. To learn more, head to my website at nicoledavidsonnegotiation.com.au where you can book a consultation online. Don't forget, I also offer one-on-one coaching, team training and expert advice on specific negotiations. My tailored approach is designed to meet your specific needs, and my proven methodologies and strategies are grounded in the latest research and best practices. So whether you're a small business owner, a corporate executive, or anyone in between, let me help you achieve your negotiation goals and maximize your success. Are there any negotiations that stand out in your mind as ones where they were significant learning experiences for you?
There are a few for different reasons. And I'll talk in generalities, because there are certain avatars for different characters that come up pretty frequently. So one of the things that was really eye-opening to me is when I was mediating, just how incredibly different people's perspectives can be. It's incredible. I remember, because I prefer to use shuttle diplomacy. So for those of you who aren't aware of that methodology, I don't like mediations where I have the one party and then the other party and then me, and we're sitting around the table and we're having people air out their grievances in front of the other side, because the lawyers just end up posturing in front of everybody and then the clients end up emoting, and it's just very messy. It's like it's entertaining to watch but not fun to mediate. So those are different things. But so I like to be able to talk to the parties separately. And so hearing the stories of one party, I'll go in and I'll say, wow, this is open and shut. The other side must be must be evil, clearly. Right.
Yeah.
And then I go to talk to the other side. And then sometimes, Nicole, I wonder, am I in the right room? Because this story is so different. So different. And it's like completely different worlds. And I'm looking at their body language and they're genuinely so upset and genuinely believe in their heart of hearts that they are correct. And so we have to think about just the psychology of memory, for example, and just the psychology of bias. So we all have a self-serving bias. We're most likely going to be biased towards ourselves, especially in situations of conflict. That self-serving bias, when you blend it with the fallibility of human memory, means that every time you recall a situation, it becomes more warped, but more warped in your favor. And so the longer these conflicts go, the further apart the stories become. And so the one of the things that I learned from that is that there is limited utility in using memory as a persuasive tool. And so that's where I developed the thought process behind what I call future focused problem solving. So as much as possible, I'm going to keep the parties oriented toward the future to think about what it takes for you and me to solve this problem going forward. What does this deal look like going forward? What does our relationship look like going forward? Because if we try to litigate issues of the past, we do not have the concrete evidence that we need in order to win. And even if we win, what do we get? probably probably nothing, right? So that's something that I learned from the mediation world. Then when I
That's
think
really
about oh, go
interesting.
ahead.
Yeah, if I'll just interrupt, because I think similar to you, I obviously do a lot of mediation as well, and I like to bring the parties into the room together for that shared perspective taking,
Oh,
because I think it's really important that they hear where the other person comes from. And I'm very big on selling at the start of that process. You're going to hear something that you totally think is wrong, and that's okay. We're not here to change everybody's mind, but you do need to know where the other person's coming from in order to work through the future what is actually possible. Because if they've got a strong belief about something that's guiding where their solutions will go, it's important that the other person, to me, it's important that they know what that is. So even if they don't believe it's true, they know what's impacting on their thought processes. So I tend to go, let's come together to talk about the past. But you're right. And I suspect there may be a difference between American attorneys and Australian lawyers in how much posturing goes on, because that can make a massive difference. But once we've done the past, often then we go into separate rooms to talk about, okay, well, now what do we do about it?
I like that. And also too, I should clarify, like that's my way of doing it. There are
Mm,
different mediators use different ways. So I like
yep.
this way because one of the keys to pay attention to is that you were still very much in control of that process. You
Mm,
coached them and you said, this is what will happen. And I'm
yeah.
assuming there was like some decorum too. When this
Yeah.
happens, do not jump across the table.
Yeah.
Right.
So as you are going to hear things you don't like, don't interrupt, write it down.
Exactly.
Is
No,
that
that's an
okay?
important point.
But that's the other thing, is I always get their agreement. Are you comfortable with that as a process? And they've said yes. So now they're stuck to it.
Oh, that's
So
smart. And quick expert tip here because I don't want to just blow past this. Look at me, I forget this is your podcast. I apologize. But what you said was really important. That was a little micro negotiation for the process. You're
yeah,
saying this is what's going to happen. This is what I need you to do. You didn't just say that. You said, are you okay with this? Can
yeah,
you do this? Because that utilizes the principle of commitment. Now it's like, hey, if you start jumping across the table, hey, you remember about 7 minutes ago when we had this conversation and you said, yes, I will behave yourself? Can you please retract your clause
yeah.
and listen?
Absolutely. So when I interrupted you there, you're about to talk about a second example of general things that you've learned.
Oh yes. Now for me now it's different because now I'm negotiating as the CEO of a company. I have a staff
Mm,
and we have deals that we're doing. So I'm negotiating as a business person and it's so humbling in a lot of different ways because for me I have to stay in my lane, Nicole. I
mm,
I need to respect the expertise of the people on my team. So if it's a legal situation, I have lawyers, they have to handle that and they have to take the lead and I have to respect their jurisdiction in that regard.
mm,
When I'm negotiating business deals for A&I, I understand like big picture vision, but my team has a better understanding of like the operations side. My chief operations officer, Steph Pally, understands that a lot better. So like what functionally would work for the company, that's her lane. Then we have Arthi, who's our CFO. She knows the numbers better than anybody, right? So I have to respect that. And so when it comes to negotiation, now I have to respect the team dynamics and stay in my lane, even though I am CEO. I still have to respect the authority of each party during the negotiation. So
yeah,
now when I'm negotiating, it's not just me negotiating as the lawyer representing my client in a contract negotiation. A lot of times, like I'm the client, I have to make sure that I don't overstep. And a lot of times it's I don't enter the negotiation until it gets to a level of severity where it's like, okay, we have to bring Kwame in. Because if
yeah.
we bring me in too early, then the person can negotiate directly with me. And I think every deal is good because I just want to play. This is playtime for me, Nicole. This is fun. Don't let the details get in the way. And so we have to recognize those strengths and weaknesses. And so it's a different game now negotiating as a CEO versus mediating a conflict or negotiating as a
But
business
I think
lawyer.
that's probably a big challenge for a lot of owners of growing businesses, isn't it? Because if you think about the average business, it started out, you've got someone who makes all the decisions, has all of the control, and then as they grow, they recruit people with specializations and expertise. And yet I think sometimes you can get trapped into a sense, well, I've still got to show like I know everything and I'm across everything and I'll step in and take control. Whereas, as you've said, you need to create that space for people and be willing to share the roles in the negotiation so that you've got the right person doing the right bit of the negotiation.
Exactly. It's a humbling type of experience. And I think it's an interesting dichotomy, because it's almost like as you become more successful in your company, in some ways it's disempowering
Yeah.
because all of these elements of your business that you were so intricately a part of because you had to be, now you have to relinquish control of those things. And there are
Yeah.
business deals and things that are happening, with clients, with other partners, and things that are happening without me even knowing. But I have to trust the process, trust my team. They're expert negotiators and they do a great job, but just having the ability as a leader to give them the space to negotiate well is important. And I
Yeah.
don't think a lot of times people fully appreciate how disempowering it can be when you're micromanaging somebody and trying
Yeah.
to treat them like a chess piece, like do this,
Yeah.
do that, do that, do it this way, say that. It's like, well, how about you just jump in and negotiate, Kwame?
Yeah.
you know. And so just learning to be quiet and give the team just generalized broad discussion, goals in terms of
Yeah.
what we want to accomplish. These are the strategic parameters. I trust you to go out and get it done. It's been tough, but it's been rewarding because it's been the best thing that we've done for the business thus far.
Fantastic. Now, I know your team's also been very busy recently on working on negotiable. Tell us a little bit about
Yes.
what that is.
Oh, I'm so excited. So, negotiable. This is our online community where we're going to help people to negotiate anything. And so we were initially thinking about doing a course, kind of taking the traditional model, creating a course, high price course, that type of thing. When you think about the big dogs in the industry, that's how they've monetized a lot of places.
Mm.
But for us, we're all about accessibility. We wanted to democratize the information. Our goal as a company is to be as generous as possible. And
Yeah.
so trying to have like having a high ticket price thing felt like something that we needed to do as the next step in our organization based on what traditionally was done. But thank goodness, one of my team members, Steph Pali, who's chief operating officer, she was pushing this subscription based model because it matches our ethos. We want
Yeah.
people to be able to access this. So it'll be a tiered model where we probably have about three price tiers. We're going to come out with the official pricing next week. But there'll be a tier where you can get access to the the ability to index the podcast and organize it and create your own learning journeys, and a
Mm.
ton of fun bonuses associated with that, like the audiobook for finding confidence in conflict. And then at the higher tier, you'll have more access to courses. And then at the highest tier, you'll have access to all of the courses. Not just one, it's going to be multiple courses, but
Yeah.
also live Q&As with me, live sessions with other negotiation experts. So the content builds and gets better over time. And so the goal is to create something where we have a global community of negotiation experts, or not even negotiation experts. Let me just say negotiators, because that
Mm.
whole expert term can be pretty alienating, because my belief is that everybody has something to add to the conversation.
Yeah.
And so we'll be able to bounce ideas off of each other, create new ideas, and learn together collectively. So yes, the American Negotiation Institute will be leading the dance with creating content and whatnot, but really the magic is going to be from facilitating conversation so we can all learn together.
I love that. And, I think I'm of the same view as you. The more we can put out information to help people develop their skills to be able to have those difficult conversations more constructively, the better the world is going to be. So, sounds like a great plan. Last thing before we finish up, if you were to give somebody one tip for the thing that would make the most difference to their next negotiation, what would that be?
I would say lean in and have the conversation. And, I was debating on, hey, Nicole asked me a question. Let me give some kind of really fancy sounding answer. I want to show up. but but here's what I found, Nicole. Very interesting things. So, first of all, the biggest challenge that people are having is that they're not having the conversations.
Mm.
And so there might be expert level negotiators that are saying, I'm not afraid of a deal. Okay. Are you afraid of a conversation with your spouse though? Are you afraid of a conversation with your kids? Like, we have to remember that confidence is compartmentalized. So even though you're a deal maker and you might be negotiating $1 million deals, $1 billion deals, whatever it happens to be, there's always going to be a performance gap for all of us in some way. Maybe it's the conversation with your in-laws, right? It's something. There's something that holds you back. So one of the biggest mistakes that people make in their most challenging negotiations is they simply don't have it. The next one is making sure you manage the very beginning of the conversation, because I just did a poll and I found out that the majority of people are most afraid of how to start the conversation. And when you think about the majority of the negotiation advice out there, it operates under the assumption that the conversation has begun. So be mindful of the beginning of the conversation, but more so than anything, just step in and have the conversation and you'll build your confidence every time.
Very good advice indeed. So, Kwame, as always, I have enjoyed having our conversation. If people want to find out more about Negotiable or want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to connect?
Yes, follow me on LinkedIn. That's the best place. That's the only social media that cares about me. On Instagram, people just care about my kids. So yes, follow me on LinkedIn, and I'll give you a link to Negotiable as well, so you all could check that out. And also Negotiate Anything, 7 days a week, and you'll get to hear amazing voices like Nicole Davidson on the show. So check us out there too.
Fantastic. Thanks again so much, Kwame. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's all for this episode of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and learned something new that you can apply in your own negotiations. Remember, negotiation is a skill that can be developed and refined over time, so keep practicing and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us on social media or email us directly. And if you liked this episode, please leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. It helps us to reach more people and continue to produce high-quality content. Until next time, keep negotiating in real life.